Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. Good morning, everybody. I am sitting here today in Boulder, Colorado in the US, and I am having a conversation with Philippe Beyvin, who is based in Paris, France. And today is our first time meeting in person, although I found Philippe by following his work on Instagram, of all places, and I will share all about that in a moment. But Philippe is a number of things, but he is a strategy consultant. He's been an editor for a publishing company. He has a passion for literature and amateur photography, which I must say is doesn't look amateurish to me. And he has an interest in the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, who I've spoken about on this podcast here before, an Israeli scientist and movement specialist, the developer of the Feldenkrais method of somatic education. And Philippe, the way I found him is he started an Instagram account called the Feldenkrais Athletic Club. And I didn't understand it at first. Now that I see it as a complete project, I understand its function, but it is a standalone Instagram account that documents in a very artful manner the life of Moshe Feldenkrais through the decades, with photographs, anecdotes, contextual information, and sort of recounts the very fascinating and intricate chapters of this person's life. And I have been interested. Well, so on a personal level, I am nearing the end of a Feldenkrais training based in Kelowna, Canada, and so part of my professional work is studying the method. And Feldenkrais has been a big influence on me over the last decade or more as a body worker, from his thinking and his writing. But I've also been extraordinarily impressed with just him as a person. His biography is unique and fascinating. And we have an English language recent biography done by Mark Rees, that's been published, which is a big contribution. But Philippe, in addition to his beautiful Instagram project, is also working on a French language biography, as well as some of his Philippe's personal experience working with the method. So the reason, Philippe, I'm so excited to speak with you today is because you've done basically a deep dive into the life and minutia of Dr. Feldenkrais's legacy. And I would love to hear about how that passion developed for you. And then, of course, let's go through some of the interesting details of this man's life and contribution. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for receiving me, and excuse me for my French accent. I will try to speak your language. And to answer the question, well, I personally came to the Feldenkrais method because of my damaged left knee. And for almost 6 months, I saw doctors who couldn't explain and fix my knee. And so, and then I broke my back. So I was in a very bad shape, and still the doctors couldn't explain anything. And so I thought to myself that I had to look for some other things. And I thought, because if nobody can fix my body, it's maybe in my mind. So I went to see a hypnotherapist, And I saw her only once, but when I saw her, she told me, well, for your knee, you should do some Feldenkrais or Qigong. I know Qigong, but I didn't know anything about Feldenkrais. And I told her, Felden what? Can you spell it? So she wrote the name on a post-it. And when I came home, I went on the internet and saw things about Moshe, and the first thing I saw was a video of a man on the floor doing very slow movement, and I said, "Okay, I can't move myself. I can't stand that. So maybe it can work." So
Mm.
I looked for a practitioner and found an ex-dancer who had some knee problems too, and she just broke her back 1 month before me. So I said, okay, maybe she will be able to fix me. And I don't know nothing about Felden what, but let's try. So I went to see her, and the first thing she told me was, well, Feldenkrais method is not miraculous, but it can do miracles. So I said, okay, let's go, let's try. And
Yeah.
so she did to me a functional integration session, and at the end, she asked me if I felt any differences, which was not the case. But when I get out of her place and I went down the stairs, I could went down the stairs normally, like a normal human being, which I wasn't be able, hadn't been able to do for months. So I said to myself, okay, there's something new.
Right.
So I practiced with her for 3 months, functional integration lessons, and then I went to awareness for movement lessons too. And since then, I stopped doing Feldenkrais method because I think it's so powerful. So, and when I was working with her, I was very astonished that nobody talked to me about Feldenkrais before. It's still amazed me that the Feldenkrais method is not known.
More known. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a very big secret, but it shouldn't be secret. So
Right.
and and when I done the first research, I saw that he was an engineer, that he had practiced judo at a high level, that he was in France at one point. So
Mm.
if he was in France, I should have known about him. So, and I saw also a reference to Georgy Ivanovich Gurdjieff. And when I was a teenager, I read books on Gurdjieff or from Gurdjieff, even if I
Right.
couldn't understand not that much. But so I said, okay, and I practiced Aikido when I was a teenager too. So I said, okay, this guy, nobody knows this guy, but the method is so powerful. And then when I was a teenager, I practiced things not close, but not so far. So I wanted to know where it was coming from, his influences, and so on. And when I did the first research, it appears that when I was a teenager, I had some of his books in my hands because my father was practicing judo in the 50s, and
Mm.
at that time in France, there was only Moshe's books on judo, and
Mm.
so I had some Feldenkrais books in my hands, but
Without knowing it.
yeah, didn't re- I didn't recall his name. And
Right.
so I said, okay, the method helped me, and I have to contribute to the method. And since I'm a literary guy, I said, okay, let's work on a biography of Moshe in French.
Very cool. So when was this? So for you, with your original, the knee injury and the back
It was
injury,
2 years ago,
I see.
and we fixed with my practitioner the knee in 4 months.
Great, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and just for listeners, because so you referred to first you began receiving what's called functional integration lessons, which are one-on-one, hands-on work, hands-on lessons. They're called because it's meant as an instruction for the nervous system, and so the functional integration refers to that. And then you also joined the group awareness through movement classes where it's not hands-on, but you're guided through some movements and self-study. Were both equally valuable for your healing, or how would you describe that?
But at the beginning, I was not able to do awareness through movement lessons. I was really weak, and the first lessons I've done, I couldn't do half of it, even if it's quite easy and everyone should be able to do the movement. But really, I was with my broken back, my swollen knee, I was out of order.
Right.
So and then after 3 months, I was quite better, and I began in the functional integration lessons in July, and in January, we fixed my knee in January.
Mm.
After awareness through movement lesson, which is the frog leg lesson,
Mm-hmm.
I did come to the good posture, and my knee stopped swollen, and I could walk like I know.
Wonderful. Oh
Yeah.
man, very very cool.
Yeah.
And it must have interested you when you learned, as you started to study Dr. Feldenkrais's life, that probably he may not have gone in the direction that he did were it not for a knee injury for himself in
Yeah.
his soccer playing years.
Yeah, absolutely. When I did the primary research, I saw that he did fix his knee. So I said to myself, well, if this guy fixed his knee, I can fix mine with his help, with his methods. So
Right.
yeah, of
Oh,
course.
wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
And his injury was really, really bad.
Yeah, yeah. But his description was it made my body cringe a little bit hearing about the angles
Yeah,
of his
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it didn't sound fun.
This mine, when he was very young, it was when he was in Palestine. He was in his 20s, but
Right.
he must have been a very strong man to be able to live with this injury.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so before we kind of go into Moshe's life and biography a little bit, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your research approach, because what struck me as I viewed as I watched the unfolding of your Instagram biography, which is I've never seen another Instagram biography, by the way. So I thought it was a very cool medium
Yeah.
to present this information, and how it sort of came out, day by day or week by week, and then finally I saw it as a complete project. Um, but it's a mixture of photographs, newspaper clippings, etc. Can you share a little bit about your research methods in terms of collecting these materials?
Yeah, I began with Mark Ree's Biography
Mhm.
because that's the first one, and then the German one too. I don't speak German, but there's plenty of tools on the internet to get translation, and then I I've done some research on press archives. I don't, so in France, in Great Britain, in the US, in Israel too. You've got so many archives you can find. So I did a lot of research, and then I also done some research on some details of Moshe's life. For example, I found these wedding acts at the Mairie de Paris archive. So, for example, or his all the documents, all the places I could search, I search. So I needed to get the primary source and not rely only on Marquis' biography or Christian Bruckart biography. I wanted to find documents. So that's why I've done, and I've got a lot more than what's on the Instagram account. And I really wanted to get the more,
Right. Well, and so the just to and of course we will link to the Instagram account, but there are 222 posts. That's the piece, and I noticed you began posting in February of this year, and then completed the set in July. So sort of over a 5-month period approximately was the unfolding of these the composition of this life story. Very, very cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about just some of the maybe we could just paint a picture, a trajectory of Dr. Feldenkrais's life. And I know some things, of course, but you are the biographer, so I'm going to defer to you. How can we set the scene for our listeners?
Yeah, well, there's a well-known mythology, biography of Moshe, who was born in 1904 in the Russian Empire, and he decided at 14 years old to quit his parents and to go to Eretz Israel. So he went there by foot alone. It was a 6 months journey. I can't even think of a young boy crossing all these countries. It was still the war, First World War, arriving in Palestine, which was really new, and he then worked on building sites, and all these kids were living on the beach, and there were kind of a lot of freedom, I guess, at that
Right.
time,
Yeah.
and then he decided. At one point, he said to himself, because he was well educated when he was with his parents, he decided he wanted to be a scientist, and he went back to high school, get his degree, and then work for the English in Palestine. And then he said to himself, that's not the life I wanted. I want to be a scientist. And so I decided to get a degree somewhere. And he met at that time a young woman called Yona, who became his wife. And they both decided to go to France. And since Moshe was not rich, decided to do some short to do the college, but scientific school in France, which was short. It was only 3 years, and Yona decided to go to become a doctor, and they went together in Paris. They were not speaking the language. It was the 30s, and Moshe went to this school called École supérieure des travaux publics, and at that time he was the last in class, and he went out the first, even if he wasn't speaking the language 3 years before, which is kind of amazing. And during that time, when he was in Palestine, he practiced jiu-jitsu. He was involved in fighting because the situation was not very, there was tensions at that time, and
Sure.
and in France, he came across Jigoro Kano, who is the founder of judo, and
Right.
Jigoro Kano said to him that if he thought that Moshe could teach to these stupid Europeans judo, even if he tried before with Japanese teachers, and Japanese teachers couldn't. It didn't work. So he said, "You don't know the good judo. We will teach it to you, but
Mm.
I'm sure you're the man who can teach judo to French people."
Right.
And that's what Moshe did. And at
Mm.
the same time, the director of the ESTP, the school he went to, said to him, "Okay, you're the best pupil we had for years. We want you to do a PhD. So you'll do a PhD." And Moshe said, "What? I can't do a PhD. I don't have any money. I want to go back to Palestine." And the director said, "No, we'll find the money for you. You're going to do a PhD."
Mm.
And Moshe, this young guy who 15 years before came from Russian Empire, went to the Sorbonne and had to work with Joliot-Curie because
Hmm.
was the assistant of the Joliot-Curie, which is kind of amazing. And
Right.
at the same time, he opened the first judo club in Paris,
Yeah.
and he was he already was willing to teach it, explaining judo. It was not just practicing like a Japanese judoka, but
Right.
since the first students were from the Sorbonne, from the ESTP, he was explaining in a scientific way how judo works,
The
and that's
principles.
why he was
Yeah.
able to to teach to people, and people were happy to understand what they were doing.
Right. Well, and just pausing for a moment because I
Yeah,
love it.
there's a lot of
No, no,
that.
I love it. But there's just a few details I want to comment on. One is, that sort of early years of growing up in wartime, Russian Empire, part of, I guess, present day Ukraine. Um, but that journey you mentioned on foot to Palestine, I think he was 15 or 14 or something along these lines. And what always stood out to me in that story was that he began by himself, solo,
Yeah,
and began his walking, and then somehow or another, by the time he arrived in Palestine 6 months later, it was a group of maybe perhaps 100 students, and so
200,
200, right. And
yeah,
so I don't know if it was his personal sort of charisma that drew, or if this was just a movement, a youth movement, but somehow or another, this idea that this solo teenager started, packed his bags and started walking to the newly founded sort of Palestine region with all of these other youth, which to me is just such an amazing early life story.
yeah, absolutely. And just, yeah, for what I've read, he came in the cities and people were, "Whoa, where are you going? Where are you?" And he said, "I'm going to Eretz Israel." And people said, "That's amazing. A young boy goes to," and so, and people were emulated and said, "Okay, if this young boy goes there by himself, let's go.
Right.
We have to go."
Join
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah, yeah,
entourage.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then even the idea that he had a lot of education as a young person, and then later, of course, pursued physics and engineering and higher
Yeah.
education, but he had this period of perhaps a decade of very physical construction work, and he talks
Yeah.
about the heavy lifting and carrying, and I believe this was probably in his football playing years.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yeah.
so very, and self-defense, and of course some of the tensions in that area. So fighting was not uncommon, and self-defense. So this sort of like deep, in his, I guess, in his teens and 20s, a very physical
Yeah.
period, and then followed by, I'm sure, well, he can sustained that with his study of judo and everything, as he then pursued his scientific career. But that always stood out to me, that this period where he wasn't studying, but in a way, his movement and his physicality was his probably his primary study at that time.
Yeah. Um, well, um, it for what I've read,
Hmm.
he said that during his construction time in Palestine, he did not open a book for 4 years, and then he fell ill, a liver problem. He went to hospital for 6 months, and finally he came out, and the doctor said that he couldn't go back to the construction site for a while, so he became the cook of the group he was working with, and he was bored because he was cooking 3 meals a day, but in between he was just so he came back to his
Reading.
old books. Yeah, he came back
Ah,
to his old mathematics, physics books, and that's when he said to himself, "Okay, that's what really interests me," and that's why he went back to high school.
I see. I see.
And well, he said that during 4 years he never opened a book.
Right.
So he
I
was
see.
just in
Interesting.
construction, uh, flirting with girls, playing football, involved in the Agana.
Mm,
And, he was, yeah, very
mm,
physically
mm.
involved for four
It's,
years. And then, well, he went
I
back
see.
to high school.
Interesting. Well, I knew the story because so going forward to where you left off, when he begins to pursue his doctorate at the Sorbonne, and he lands in the lab with the Curies, Madame Curie and Pierre Curie, who went on to win the Nobel Prize for their, what was their discovery in radioactivity or something
Yeah,
like that?
radioactivity, yeah, in
Right.
1935. And Moshe arrived at the institute the year before.
Ah. I see. So he was kind of right there in that time
Yeah,
period. What and the part of Moshe's life that I don't know a lot about is how long was he involved in his physics and engineering career?
well, he worked at the institute for almost 10 years, and he did some during that time. He did some personal research, and he was working for the judo, and so in 1949, I guess he left without having finished his thesis. So, and then he married Yona in 1940 because she just had finished her a study as a pediatrician, and so he worked trying to sell some ideas and invention while he was in France. He made some inventions
I
and
see.
tried to
Sell
to
them.
sell them at
Yeah.
that time.
Ah, I see. Hmm. Hmm.
And then in 1940, the war was there, the Germans were there, and so Joliot-Curie at the Institute of Radium tried to help Jews from the lab to escape.
I see.
So he helped Moshe to escape from France, and Moshe left France a few days before the German came in Paris, really a few days before.
Wow, I see. I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
he go to Palestine or where did he go
Oh
next?
no, he left to Great Britain
Ah,
directly.
I see.
He went to Bordeaux, and he took the last boat who left France for Great Britain.
I see. Okay, and so And then what did he do in there? What was so what? Yeah, what was the next sort of chapter of
Yeah,
his?
the next chapter, when he arrived in Great Britain, at that time, the English were very suspicious about people coming from France and other countries. So Moshe was speaking a very good English because of his Palestinian years, and he had this name which can sound German. So at first, um, in Great Britain, they thought he could be a spy. So he went to a camp for a few months, and then a major scientist he worked with, they were reading a list of people to know if they knew them. And so Bernard saw Moshe's name, and he said, "What, what the hell? We need this guy. He used to work on things in France we need, so we need him." So he went out from the camp, and he was sent in Scotland to work on Isaac radar for the British Navy.
I see. Wow.
And his wife Fiona found a job at the Glasgow hospital.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so for 4 years, Moshe worked on research with the English. And because he is Moshe, he came back to judo too. He told them, because they have some spare time, he said, "Okay, I can teach you judo." And so he teach them judo at that time too. And at that time, his knee injury came back, and he saw a doctor at the hospital in Glasgow, and the guy said, "You won't be able to walk with such a bad knee. We need to operate." And Moshe said, "I'm not sure. What are the chances to for the knee to be good again?" And the doctor said, "Well, 50-50." So Moshe said, "I prefer not to."
Yeah.
And so, but he had really big problems with it. And so since he was doing some judo, and at that time he was also thinking about a book already about how the body is functioning and so on. And he tried on himself what he was trying to think about. And that's in Scotland. That's where all the method begins. All this
Mhm.
work on the method, because he was doing some lecture to his Polish scientist, and he was working on him. And then his colleagues asked him to work with them with this new thing he was trying,
Mhm.
um, and he fixed his knee in Scotland.
Okay. So, and this is, are we still in the late 1940s or are we in the
No,
1950s?
it's before the end of the war.
Yeah, I
During
see.
it's during the war.
It's during the war years.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that is sort of that's when he really began working with what became the Feldenkrais method.
yeah, right.
Okay. Okay.
Even if at that time it had no name, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
And
so,
there's something important about Moshe, uh, and the thing important, and that's why I do like it too. Moshe is a scientist.
uh-huh.
Moshe has always said that he never does something he can't explain. So everything can be explained with the method. It's not like martial arts or yoga when people tell you, you have to have, well, Qigong, you have to have the Qi, the energy, you will
Hmm.
feel the energy. So Moshe always said, energy, yeah, maybe, but I can't explain. Look, I don't do that. Moshe
Right.
has always, that's
Yeah.
always the theory, and we try to find if it goes real in reality. And that's what I like in Moshe. He is a scientist,
Right.
and even if he practiced like martial arts, in which there's the ki, shi, energy thing, he always said, I can explain that, but it's
Hmm.
not. It doesn't. It, it's not something you can't explain, and that's what I
Right.
like in Moshe. And during the war time, he was working on the body, the functioning of the body, and he read a lot of other writers, scientists, and he has done a lot of research. And
Mm-hmm.
he always is an intellectual, but also a practitioner. He's
Hmm.
a scientist.
Right. Right. He's sort of a research, as a scientist, he's kind of both he's maybe a little bit a theoretician, but he's an experimentalist,
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
if anything. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what as I reviewed through your Instagram page, and I'm reminded of how many how the degree of sort of cross fertilization with with his ideas. As you said, he both studied a lot, like he studied the from Alexander technique, for
So,
instance. He studied with the mystic Gurdjieff. What tell so in his where I think we're in sort of his middle years, perhaps. What
yeah.
were some of the intellectual collaborations or that seem important from your perspective?
Well, Alexander for sure, because all the work on the posture, and even if he had some bad relation with Alexander, he worked with one of his students.
Right.
Gurdjieff was important. Uh, the, the thinking of Gurdjieff, but also something that is less known in Gurdjieff. There's a lot of dances and what Gurdjieff called work. And there's a lot of movements,
Right.
exercise in Gurdjieff that are less known. And Moshe was part of a Gurdjieff group in London after the war, and he learned a lot with that. Even if he didn't like the mystic part of Gurdjieff, he learned a lot from the
The
dancing,
methods.
the movement, all that thing. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, let's take a moment just to briefly just because I Gurdjieff was only a name I knew until but as I did a little bit of research, I realized that in his day he was quite a known, influential, considered as a mystic or within that tradition, but with his own methods, as you say, what's called the work, and in a major aspect using dance and movements to music. I think he even did some of the musical
yeah,
composition. But
absolutely.
anything else you would add to the listener who doesn't know, who like me didn't know very much about Gurdjieff? Anything else that
Mhm. Well, Gurdjieff, when he was young, went to Asia and to find some people who could teach you. He was like, it was in the 20s, and it was at that time people were looking for a sense, yeah, sense of life. And so he went to all traditional people to learn that.
Mm, mm.
And he came back with all all he knew about it and tried to. I won't be able to find the word in English, but um, he was always telling that people were acting like robots and they had to think of what they were doing. For example, during the exercise, you have to do the exercise. At the same time, you have, for example, to count from 1 to 1,000. And at the same time, you have to think, to feel something for another person. Also, it's just not movement, but it's also a way to be aware and be conscious of what you're doing,
I see.
which is at the basis of the Gurdjieff thinking is that you're acting mostly like a robot, and you have to be more conscious of what you're doing, which is
Break
kind
free of that. Yeah, I see. And he was known as a very uh uh what's the word, unusual guy, uh
yeah,
acting spontaneously,
uh,
and unpredictable in his, as part of his sort of, I guess, persona, or I suppose his methods.
yeah.
So do you know, did Moshe was part of his, studied his work, and was in, well, was interested or learned from the
Well,
movements?
he was part of a group of a
Okay,
student of Gurdjieff. Can't recall his name, but he was part of a group in
okay,
London.
I see.
So with a guy who went to Turkey. Well, a guy who met Gurdjieff and Uspensky, who was a colleague of Gurdjieff and learned with him, and so he worked with this guy for all his time in England
I see.
after the war.
I see. Great. Well, so who else of the, do you think were big influences, for his intellectual development? I mean,
Uh,
there's
there's a guy.
two. There's, yeah. Go ahead.
This guy in Switzerland, but I can't recall his name right now. Um,
Is it the, what is it, Jacoby or something,
yeah,
or
Jacobi. He
yeah?
went to see Jacobi in Switzerland, who was a guy who worked with a woman, and they did things that Moshe was working on, but these two persons never published. They were working with people, but and so Moshe went to see him and work, stay with him for 10 days and learn a lot from him. So Jacobi, and then in the 50s he met in the Gurdjieff group an American woman who, names. Uh, the woman who developed the method on fascia,
Oh yes, Ida Rolf. Ida Rolf.
Ida Rolf. So
Right.
he met Ida Rolf in England at the institute, Gurdjieff Institute, and they became friends at
I
that time.
see.
So it
I
was
see. I assumed that they had met in the United States, but so that's
they met
interesting.
before. They met before in England. Ida Rolf was invited in England, and so they met there.
Ah, I
So
see. Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Moshe, I said he was a scientist, but the other thing, I think Moshe was a real humanist. He was always curious. He always
Mm.
tried to meet the people who were working on things close to what he was thinking. He was really in learning from other people through books or through encounters. He always tried to meet people. And
Mm. Mm. Yeah, no doubt. Well, so I guess, so as he became known, for his methods, so at least as I understand it, he did a lot of, at some point he went back to Israel, because there was the period of time what we know of as the Alexander Yanai lessons, was a period of time, I believe, in Israel, unless I'm wrong, where he was teaching very consistently for a period of time, and that's part of the collection of his work that we have.
yeah, well, at when he was in England, he became English. So I became English. He was thinking of. He met a lot of people while in England. He was trying to. He was working on books and he was practicing judo, and he developed his method while in England after the war. And
Okay.
then at the end of the 40s. he was approached by Israeli people to help them with defense projects and to procurement of, to because Israelis wanted to construct some defense weapons, and they needed people in Europe to help them with that. And so he began to work with the Israeli states, and then he thought he had to go back to Israel.
Mm, mm,
His wife Yona left him to go back to Israel,
mm.
and so at the beginning of the 50s, he went back to Israel, and he worked for 2 years with the defense, and he was not that good in research. And when he came back in Israel, he was already still doing Moshe's thing, which is movement and his method, trying to teach it to people. And so they asked him to leave the defense, and so he said, "Okay, I'm 50, but it's time to do what I'm good for." So he then introduced his method to people through lessons, the Alexander Yanai lesson, because he shared a studio there, and some functional integration lesson he was doing in Tel Aviv at his mother's flat. At the beginning, he was back to his mother and living there, working there, plus the lessons at the Alexander Yanai studio.
Was Alexander Yanai, was that in Tel Aviv or
Yeah,
where?
yeah, 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 yeah. It's a street in Tel Aviv.
I see. Okay. I see. Hmm. And so there he began to train. Was he training students who then became functional integration practitioners?
No, no, no. He was not. He was. The first group he formed was in the late 60s. So at what point he was just teaching the awareness for movement lessons and practicing with the individual lessons, and it was doing well. He was working a lot with dancers, with a physics teacher, and people who had some problems like me with my knee, and he was already thinking of creating a state public institute. He was really in my method is something scientific that everyone in Israel should learn. And so he was lobbying to get to know people. And a few years before it came to him, he tried to meet David Ben Gurion, who was the head of the states. And
Right. Right.
in 1957, one of his friends, who was a scientific very close to David Ben Gurion, he introduced to him, and Moshe was able to help David Ben Gurion with his back,
Right.
and it helped a lot Moshe because he was one of his clients was the head of the state, so he had a lot more clients, and he was able to talk to Ben Gurion to help him to create the state-owned institute of his method.
Ah,
And
I see.
he worked a lot on that for years and years, and Ben Gurion helped him, introduced him to people in the United States to get financing in Israel, but he has never been able to create it, which
This institute.
was
I see. Interesting. Well, and there's that famous photograph of Ben Gurion, and was it public at the time? Was it in a newspaper or something? It's showing
yeah, yeah,
David Ben Gurion doing a handstand on the
yeah,
beach.
yeah. David Ben Gurion went to the beach, and he knew that photographs and reporters were following him, and he did the handstand on the beach, knowing that people would take a picture, and then the picture went everywhere in the world. And
Viral. It was a
yeah,
viral photograph. Yeah.
yeah, and nobody told that to. And at the time the picture was published, Moshe was in England, and so he discovered the picture in a English newspaper. So, but it helped Moshe because then everybody knew that it was Moshe.
Popularizing
Yeah,
his,
yeah,
putting his name out there.
yeah,
But something that always struck me in Moshe Feldenkrais is, is that he knew, and maybe it was later in his later years, but I mean, he knew many high level people. I mean, in the judo world, of course, he was right at the top, with the Jigoro Kano and other, instructors, and he continued his judo career to a
yeah,
high
right.
level of training. But even among scientists, Ben Gurion as the head of state, later important. I think, was it Margaret Mead? He
Yeah,
There's a story about Margaret Mead where he gave her the key to understanding. She's an anthropologist. Understanding something she was
that was later in the 60s, but really
right.
during his Israeli years, at the beginning of the state of Israel, he knew everyone in Israel, and everybody knew him when he was walking in the street. Everybody was, "Hello, Moshe."
Right.
Everybody knew him in Tel Aviv for sure, and in Jerusalem and at high level state, because he knew very many scientific people and political people.
Mm.
So he even fixed Moshe Dayan health too. So he worked, and Ben Gurion helped him to know people too.
Mhm. Very cool. Well, let's jump a little bit
Yeah,
forward to the sort of, I guess, maybe in his later years after, the Alexander Yanai period, he began traveling to the United States and probably other. I mostly know about his time in the with San Francisco and Esalen, and the his final training in the United States was the
yeah.
Amherst series.
Well,
But so
I'm sure that the method would have disappeared without the people at SNM.
I see.
Yeah, that's really what I think, because in Israel he found 13 teachers, but 13 people in Israel is not that much. And there was this longtime friend in Switzerland. He found him before, and so you were 13 people in Israel, one guy in Switzerland, which is not that much. And then people at Esalen were always looking for new forms, and they introduced him in the States. And in the States, people were not look, were listening to him, and thought he had things to teach, which was much more difficult even in Israel. And the people at S7 helped him a lot to develop the method, and I'm sure that without them, the method would have disappeared.
Mm. So
And so,
what was that in the 1970s? When did he connect to Esalen? Do you?
yeah, at the beginning of the 1970s, yeah.
Okay. So then for
Then it quit. Yeah,
for about 10 or 12 years was when he was traveling to the
yeah,
United States and doing teaching bigger numbers of developing students,
absolutely,
basically. Yeah, I see.
absolutely.
I see. I see. Wow. What else? Any other little anecdotes or uh, details that you that would?
I was talking about the thing that Moshe was a humanist, a very curious guy, and he learned from the other. And there's uh, sometimes people forget one person who is his wife, Yona, because she was a pediatrist, so she was working with children. And Moshe,
Children, I see. Okay.
yeah, and Moshe worked a lot on understanding the development of children, and he did that with Yona. And so Yona is forgotten, but she should not. She has been his wife for 20 years. They went to Paris together, to Scotland together. So I think she helped him a lot with understanding how a human being is learning. And it's a very
Interesting.
important thing in the method too. There's a lot of movement that are children movement.
Developmental stages,
Yeah,
and that's still part of the way we learn as students,
absolutely.
by going through many of the watching videos of children, but then also performing the movements. So that's a big part of the method as
Yeah.
it's taught today. Yeah.
And the other thing is that is less known maybe is that Moshe always worked with dancers. Even in the 20s in Palestine, he did took some lessons, dance lessons at that time, and he was since he was obsessed with movement. There's a big connection, big link with dancers, and so he was friend with Noah Eshkol, who worked on a movement notation, and he always worked a lot with artists, but specifically dancers.
I see. I see. Wow. Well, so could we circle back to your work in your writing in progress? Because as I understood it, your part of it is biography, part of it is your own story with the method. Can you share a little bit about this writing project?
Yeah, there's two parts. The first one is a biography, but you can read like a novel because, yeah, well, Moshe is a kind of a hero after all he has done. And the second part is how I came to Moshe's method, how I fixed my knee, my back, and how I became maybe a better human being.
I see. I see. Have you found friends, so because for you, it's maybe been 2 years of first getting the big improvement and then becoming very interested in the life and the story. Have you found community? Do you have new friends who are other Feldenkrais enthusiasts? I'm curious.
That's not easy. At the beginning, when I was practicing, I was talking to everyone about Feldenkrais, but the method is not that easy to explain. It's quite not easy, but it's not easy. And so I don't talk that much about Moshe now
Okay.
because, so if you want to explain it, you have to take time, and the better is what Moshe said, just try it.
Right.
Trying it is much more effortless than so. But I've got every Tuesday I go to the awareness for movement lessons, and there's people coming for 2 years, and people are working hard and nice people.
Oh, good. Good. Well, I think, one in terms of some of his legacy. I mean, of course, you know the Feldenkrais Guild. There's a North American Guild.
Yeah,
I assume there's a Europe. I don't know how many
yeah, but
guild,
yeah,
but
there's a
there.
European one, and then a French Federation.
I see.
Does.
So luckily, there's, by the in the final stages of his life, he was able to teach students who then put together a curriculum and things like that. But the other thing, at least within American written materials, I think it was important that the Feldenkrais method was included in the work of a Norman Doidge. And Norman Doidge is a neuroscientist writing about neuroplasticity, and in many ways, in his books, look at the emerging science of neuroplasticity, and he credits Moshe Feldenkrais as in sort of being ahead of his time in believing that the human nervous system was more capable of change than many people believed in that era. So that's, I think it's valuable, at least in the United States context. That's done something to create a bit more awareness for the Feldenkrais method, as still useful in today's methods and techniques. So that's one addition. Do you think there's anything else that's sort of helping to keep the methods alive?
Wow, that's yeah, but I think one of his legacy is his belief that the strong link between the mind and body, for sure. The other thing, which is not the theory but the method in itself, it's everybody can do it. And there's not that much method that are so easy to get in.
Right.
And that's one of the powerful thing with Moshe's methods. Everybody can do it, and you don't have to know
very accessible, right? Anatomy.
You don't have to know things about anatomy, or you don't have to be strong. You don't have to. Everybody can do it.
Right.
And then you learn about yourself, for sure. You move better, and you learn a lot of things on the human body that nobody teach you before. So, but it's easy to get in, which is not the case of a lot of other.
Yeah. No, a lot of things have much more barriers. If you have to be strong or flexible or knowledgeable, but he doesn't suppose any of those things.
Absolutely.
In the method. Yeah, it's human development in the broadest sense of the word. Well, Philippe, thank you so much. This has really been wonderful to hear about your process and some of the detail that has painted the picture of this method in his life. I really appreciate you taking time today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.